Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. I thought it was a coincidence that their house looked like ours. I was wrong. The road stretched endlessly, dissolving into the horizon like an old memory trying to fade. By the time we reached the outskirts, dusk had already swallowed most of the sky. What lay ahead wasn't exactly a village anymore, not the kind my parents remembered. It had grown into something in between. Not a city, not the countryside. A place caught halfway through becoming something else, yet never quite arriving. We were visiting a distant relative. Someone my father used to know before time and silence replaced letters. The air felt strange the moment I stepped out of the car, dense, unmoving, as if it had been waiting for us. Children played nearby, their laughter thin, distant, like it came from somewhere else entirely. Their house stood at the end of a narrow lane, pale and ordinary in the fading light. Yet as soon as I walked in, my breath caught. It was our house. The same. Every corner. Every misplaced chair. Even the faint scrape on the dining table leg. Exactly where ours had been. I laughed nervously, glancing at my parents. Looks like we've been cloned. They smiled. I could tell they felt it too, that quiet unease hiding beneath the absurdity of coincidence. My father brushed it off, saying, "Maybe all modern houses look alike these days." Upon reaching the terrace, the view stretched wide, fields melting into shadow, the faint hum of insects rising like prayer. But the people there, our hosts, spoke strangely. Not wrong, just delayed, like they were translating thoughts that didn't quite fit inside their mouths. Something was wrong. I said I'd go find my parents downstairs. My cousin, who had come along, followed me for a while before halting midway. "I need to go back up," he said quietly. "What for?" He didn't answer, just turned, disappearing up the dim staircase. When he came down again, a few minutes later, his face had changed. He looked serene, tranquil in a way that felt unnatural, as if all thought had drained from him. I tried not to look too long. Downstairs, everything mirrored home again. The layout, the smell, the framed photo on the wall, the way the light pooled against the curtains. It was like walking through a dream stitched together from memory. I made my way to what would have been my room. The moment I stepped inside, something twisted in my chest. It was right, but it wasn't. The furniture, the arrangement, perfect replicas, but the air was heavier, the colors wrong. The walls seemed dimmer, as if light itself refused to stay. I stepped out for a second, calling to my parents, and when I turned back, the walls had changed shade entirely. I froze. The more I remember my real room, its blue walls, its window, its faint smell of old books, the more this place seemed to imitate it, reshaping itself according to my thoughts. That's when I noticed the corner. In my actual room, that's where a small wooden shelf stood, a candle, a cross, my mother's Bible resting beneath. It was here too, exactly the same. I moved closer, the candle flickering faintly in the half-dark. Only it wasn't a flame. It shimmered, like a memory of fire trapped behind glass. And the cross, it wasn't wood at all. It seemed to have grown out of the wall, its shape slightly distorted, curved at the edges, as though carved by someone who had only heard what a cross should look like. A Bible lay beneath it, untouched. I picked it up. The cover was perfect, smooth, clean. But when I opened it, the pages were wrong. The words twisted on the paper, shifting shapes that didn't belong to any language I knew. The longer I stared, the more they writhed, like they were alive. At the bottom of one page, a line had been scratched in something dark and metallic. Something that smelled faintly of rust. Faith binds what memory forgets. A whisper brushed against my ear. Too soft to understand, too close to ignore. The candle flared once, and for a single instant, the cross moved. That's when I knew this house wasn't copying ours. It was worshiping it. Or us. I stumbled out, hard hammering, found my cousin, the one who'd come with me, and told him we needed to leave. Now, he didn't question it. We gathered whoever would listen, ignoring the calm, smiling faces that told us it was peaceful here, that it felt right. We ran to the car. As we drove off, the headlights slicing through mist, I looked back once. The house stood perfectly still. Then, slowly, it began to fade, not vanish, but dissolve like paint washing off glass. For a moment, I tried to remember its exact shape. The door, the terrace, the color of the walls. But the more I tried, the less I could recall. It slipped from memory, piece by piece, until I wasn't sure if we'd ever been there at all. That night, when I reached home, I hesitated before unlocking the door, because for just one unbearable second, I couldn't remember if this was a real house. Story 2, Hollow Skin Grove. So why is it called Hollow Skin Grove? Eli finally began a few minutes into our hike. I don't know, Heather returned. Probably named after a type of tree that grows around here or something. What? That's a lame answer. What do you mean you don't know? Isn't it your job to research the locations before we check them out? Well, yeah, but the location names aren't always an important part. Just because an area is allegedly haunted doesn't mean it'll be named after the legend. Yeah, it does. That's like 90% of haunted locations. Goatman's Bridge, Amityville House, Gettysburg Battlefield. Okay, well, Goatman's Bridge is a nickname given to Alton Bridge. It was named something else before it was haunted. Same thing with the Queen Mary. The boat isn't actually haunted by the Queen, dude. Look, all I'm saying is that Hollow Skin Grove definitely sounds like a location based on a local legend more than a local flora. Heather shrugged. I don't know what to tell you. When I looked into it, all that came up was mentions of it in online forums. And nobody had seemed to actually walk all the way out to the place to confirm what it was. It was all inconsistent accounts from locals about strange noises and figures in the woods. Nothing to link the name to. Hang on, Eli snickered, slowing his pace and placing a hand to his head. You're telling me that we're walking miles out into possibly gator-infested bayous on the word of inconsistent accounts? Look, Eli, we're already scraping the bottom of the barrel here. We've hit all the big ones that we can afford to drive to. So unless you want to start funding plane tickets out of state, this is the best we get. My friend put his arms up at the feet, then crossed them with a smirk. All right, fine. I'm just saying we already drove 3 hours to get here. So it had better be worth it. What's one of these so-called accounts? Convince me. I saw a slight smirk appear on Heather's lips, eager to finally flex her knowledge. Well, like I said, there was a lot of the usual stuff. People hearing noises late at night. Screams, moans, ghoulish wails. Standard ghost fare. She mocked, wiggling her fingers. But the thing that got me was the disappearances. One of these spots. Jackson finally cued him with a chuckle. How many this time? Allegedly? Quite a few. I didn't look into records and stuff for authenticity. But there were a few people who claimed it and gave names, so there has to be merit. A lot of decent-sized towns surrounding this area. So it's not unbelievable that the population could get lost out here. Jackson kept his hands stuffed in the pockets behind his overalls, but adjusted his shoulders nervously. I mean, isn't it possible that they just sort of got stuck in the swamp somewhere, fell into the water, and a gator got them? That caused Eli to stop in his tracks. Oh, come on, Heather, really? Is that what we're walking into? I am not wading into bog if... Okay, would you two chill with the gators? Heather rolled her eyes. This area is clear. There haven't been wildlife reports on crocs in a long time. I made sure of all that. You think I won't be out here if that were the case? Hey, don't lump me in with Eli. Jackson chuckled. I was simply pointing out the possibility that maybe those wails and vanishings were not so paranormal. Always healthy to have a stick in the mud along for the ride on our paranormal hunting crew. I quipped at him with a smug look. Keeps us grounded. He flipped me off. Well, if y'all would let me finish my debrief, I could probably diffuse any skepticism you may be having, Heather teasingly huffed. Right, carry on. I urge her. I had already heard the tale that I knew she was about to tell when she texted me about the spot, but I was eager to hear it again. Thank you, Shell. She gleamed showily before setting her face back to its ominous glare. So there's all these disappearances, right? And that's creepy enough. But get this, there's this guy on one forum, and this area is super low-key. Mind you, not the kind of place that people would actively just make shit up over like other urban spots. This guy comes in with his story about how he's out in the woods fishing, right? It's secluded, it's peaceful, and there seems to be a decent amount of fish. So he hangs around for a while and gets carried away till the sun sets to about where it is now. I can feel the hot, humid air around us chill a bit as Jackson, Eli, and I look at the sky that Heather gestures to. The sun's nearly set below the fingers of surrounding trees, casting the world in that silvery blue haze that comes with twilight, that scarce hour between the hushing of birds and the waking of crickets, a limbo where the comfort of day meets the unknown of night. My excitement grew as Heather continued. Now, according to him, he's a rugged redneck type, the kind that doesn't scare easy and certainly doesn't fear the dark. But he says that as the lights start to dim, he starts getting this eerie feeling. The air starts to smell rancid, and not like the usual swamp stench. He said it was pure rot, dead fish, and hot old meat. So he's standing there on the shoreline near the water, starting to get a chill up his spine, and he's finally about to leave, but then he hears a slosh across the way. Heather stuck her boot out to a spot where enough water pooled to make a puddle and dragged her foot roughly through it, acquainting our ears with the same sound a man must have heard. He looks up, and there among the trunks of the willows and water oaks that are sticking out of the bayou, he sees this man. Oh shit, Eli mutters, a tinge of excitement to his tone. He says from what he can make out, the guy looks normal, average size, plain build, hair not too long like he's wild or something. But the thing that stands out about him is his skin. The dude is pale as hell and completely naked, just standing in the middle of the swamp before nightfall. Oh, hell no, I chuckled, the anticipation building in my chest. I already knew the payoff, and Heather knew that I did, but she indulged me anyway. Oh, it gets worse, because the guy isn't even moving. He's just standing there still as a statue, staring, sopping wet, with his eyes open wide and mouth hanging in a silent scream. What the fuck? Jackson gasped. The guy who posted the story said that he just stands there, not moving, too shocked by what he's looking at. He says the guy doesn't move either. At least, not for some time. He just stands there with his arms out like this. Heather demonstrated by lifting her arms slightly from her sides and letting them hover there, inhumanly, uncomfortably. He said that as he stood frozen, eyeing the stranger down and waiting for him to make a move, he focused in on his face, and that's when he noticed it. He hadn't seen it before because of the weird lighting and the distance, but the man in the water, his eyes were black like coal, just two dark pools boring deep into him. Heather came to a complete stop in her leading, turned to face us with an expression to mirror the one flickering against the back of our eyes. He said as soon as he noticed it, and the flag finally went off to run, the man out in the swamp crouched down, sinking himself into the water until he disappeared. He said the last thing he saw as he snatched up his rod and ran was bubbles on the surface slowly gargling toward him. We'd all been so invested in her story that we hadn't even realized we'd reached the end of the walking trail. So all of us jumped a bit as Heather backed up without looking, sloshing into the water of the bayou until it rose to her knees. With an innocent smirk, she said, "Well, come on in." The rest of the way we moved by pond. Eli, Jackson, and I all looked at one another, and with varying degrees of confidence, checked our waders, then sloshed in after her. And there it was, with the finale of Heather's masterful storytelling. I felt it, that shiver up my spine, that anxiety in my gut, that sweet, sweet adrenaline of fear that only the unknown could bring. It was a high we all chased. It was the reason we did what we did. A lot of people wouldn't fancy the idea of willingly going somewhere they thought might be haunted. But me, I lived for it. Ever since I was a kid, I was fascinated by ghost stories and urban legends, things that people couldn't explain or places that's origins were borderline unknown. There's a special rush with the unexplained that you just don't get anywhere else. A nagging itch that begs you to scratch it as you uncover more and more truths. That's what always drove me into places like this. Dark forests and abandoned houses. Places so mysterious and dripping with potential that an entire county could make up cultures built around them. But it's always a double-edged sword. That mystery is great. Yeah, but it only takes you so far. Most of the time you get there, and after a few hours, the case is closed. It's all made up. The forest really is just dark, and that's all that it is. And that abandoned house? The detached footsteps you were warned of in ghostly groans tend to just be as old wooden joints creaking and popping. The payoff is never as good as the build-up. And though years of running the same routine had yielded minimal results, it never stopped me from pursuing more. Because at the end of the day, the high was worth the hangover. It was fun to explore and freak yourself out with friends for an hour or two, because at least the memories that followed outweighed the letdown of the lack of anything real. I think deep down, though, even though I often told myself that, I truly did one day hope to find a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow. Something real and tangible to show I wasn't silly for chasing childhood campfire tales. Something truly paranormal to scratch that insatiable itch once and for all, whose mystery I could chase until the end of time. Looking back now, I feel foolish for ever wishing for such a thing. For ever thinking that finding such a horror would bring anything good. Our hike through the water began slow and careful, moving through the murk so as not to slosh any into our overalls. We'd borrowed the gear from Eli's dad, and aside from wanting to keep dry ourselves, we really didn't want to return it waterlogged. "Shelby, can you pass the GPS?" Heather asked, leaning back. As much as I'd like to pretend I studied the map by heart, we're going to get turned around fast with all the water. "What's up with all this anyway? I thought you said there was a walking path." Eli asked. "Apparently there is, but the summer rains flood the bayou and bring the levels up. Someone on the forums who came out here said the place is more worth coming like this anyway. Adds to the creep factor." "I hope so," Jackson snickered. "This has to be one of the most intensive treks we've done so far." "It'll be worth it, I bet." I chimed in. "I've got a good feeling about this one." I really did. Maybe it was all that prep and extra effort that made it feel like more of a grand adventure. But as the sun set lower in the sky and the space between the trees grew from that hazy blue to a dark, foreboding black, my heart thrummed faster. Deeper into the bog we went, further away from civilization, and more into an unknown that so few other people had dared to travel. Us though, we were going all the way. That was the plan, at least. Where so many other people had chickened out and never made it to the grove itself, we had the intention of getting to the clearing and seeing if we'd really find the mysterious man of the bayou. Solid proof that all our searching wasn't in vain. We were grizzled veterans at this by now, and we weren't going to be deterred. Then again, maybe a grizzled veteran would have turned back. Maybe they would have seen the signs and got out of that swamp as fast as possible. Maybe it was so many years of that nagging itch that drove us deeper into those woods against our better judgment. I didn't start to feel it until the twine. We had been moving for around half an hour. Heather guiding fearlessly in the front. Eli was behind her, then me, then Jackson heading up the rear. We flicked our flashlights on now that the swamp had become a dark maze of moss-tangled stumps and algae-ridden pools. I held my breath each time I swept mine through the trees, caught in the middle of both the desire and fear of spotting a man nestled among the dark bark. He never appeared, though, no matter how deep we went, and there wasn't a noise out of place save the occasional heron song to join the chorus of cricket chirps. That changed when suddenly, Eli went tumbling forward in front of me, nearly toppling into the murky basin, if not for Heather's back to catch himself on. "Whoa, Eli!" She scoffed as water sloshed up behind her, sprinkling her back and pouring a bit down her waders. She was mad, but once she saw the state of our friend, she stopped complaining. It was clear he got it worse. All of us tried to be sensitive, but we couldn't help but crack snickers as Eli stood back up, water dripping down his face and shirt as he glared unamused. Eventually our chuckles broke him down and he started to giggle too. Yeah, laugh it up. It was bound to happen to one of us eventually. There was no way we made it out of here dry. Of course it happened to you too, man. Jackson shook his head. You good? What did you even trip over? I think a root or something. Whatever was hooked my foot good. Maybe it was this. I offered, shining my light in the space between him and I. Up from the depths, a thin line of string had surfaced. We all gathered a look and saw that it was just simple twine, coarse hairs tangled together, and bound to make a rope just thicker than a plastic straw. Heather reached out and pulled it up with a finger. We had gloves on, so none of us had qualms about touching it. But she still couldn't hide her disgust as the string dripped with pond scum and algae. Beneath it, we could barely make out the fibrous bright white the twine once was. This looks man-made, Heather noted. You did say this was a walk path, Jackson replied, grabbing one end and tugging. At first, we thought the string was simply loose, but as he pulled, more emerged from the water, going taut somewhere beneath the surface near a tree, like it was tied to the stump. If this is a flood area, they probably strung these up to make sure people could still find the trail. I guess that would make sense. I nodded. Eli hesitated a moment before responding. Either that, or it was a fence to warn to keep out. That sent another chill across the air, this one much stronger than the last. It was night now, and though Heather's recount was scary, nothing was more exciting than being close to the grove, possibly finding the border that warned there was no going back. Still, even though I bought the boys' theories, something about the string put me off. It was unusually low to the ground for a guiding line, and though it could have slipped, it was also white. Wouldn't something for safety be a more fluorescent color like yellow or orange? Heather didn't help ease the feeling as she spoke, tugging the coil tight again and tracing it with her eyes between GPS glances. Well, my money is on Jackson. The rope leads along the same path we need to walk. That's good to know. If we get lost from your terrible navigation, we can use this to get back. Eli smirked. Heather flipped him off before turning forward and continuing on, the rope still in her hand as a railing. Everyone laughed at the interaction and moved on, but I couldn't give more than a courtesy chuckle. The rope on the abandoned path in the middle of nowhere that rarely anyone ever walked, let alone the same path we were on. And while maybe Eli was right about getting back, to me, it felt more like it was beckoning us forward. From that point on, the twine became our new GPS. Before, Heather had to stop now and then to orient us, but with the rope, it was always winding onward in the exact path toward hollow skin. Maybe Jackson was right, but the longer the rope ran and the more stumps we found it lassoed to, the less it sat right with me. If this trail was really so obscure and unknown, why would someone take the time to hang lines up around it? We've been down roads far more traveled with fewer safety precautions. Still, I didn't say anything yet. Nobody else seemed bothered by the occurrence, so I left it be, lest I amp up the fear too early into the journey. Turns out, I didn't have to. Our second omen to turn back came another 10 minutes later. We heard our first abnormal noise. Eli and Heather were small talking about the surrounding trees, pointing out a few barkless types that could be considered hollow skin. How is that hollow skin? Eli snorted. It would have to be a tree with all bark and no trunk, not the other way around. Whatever. People name things weirdly all the time. Why we call it a driveway when it's where we park? Eli ignored that excuse and looked around. These trees are pretty weird though. They look like regular oaks, so why do so many have their bark missing? Maybe termites? Or something about this area makes it rot off. Heather fake gasped, then turned back and slapped his shoulder to a halt. Maybe the skin falls to the ground and becomes, get this, hollow. Boo! Eli scoffed. Jackson and I just sat listening to their bickering with amused grins. The only other noise being the ambience of our sloshing and the nocturnal fauna. Then it wailed out. It was distant, yet too close for comfort. Somewhere just off in the trees beyond our flashlight beams. A shrill, raspy whine. It was low and crackly at first, but slowly whinnied out to a steady tune after a moment, like somebody slowly scraped an untuned violin string. It was impossible that we imagined it, because the forest heard it too, the symphony of the night when hushed around us, and our sloshing stopped. All flashlights shot in its direction, and the four of us held perfectly still, not even rippling the water press against our pants. We stood that way for what could have been an hour, and the whole time I don't think I heard a single person take a breath. But then water sloshed from behind a tree. At that, I let out a yelp, and Eli swore under his breath. All of us pivoted in the water and took a few steps back, but with the murk pushing back against us, we didn't make it far. Whatever was coming at us was much faster, and we didn't stand a chance. In the chaos, Heather finally managed to shine her beam in its direction to get a clear view of our attacker, and an offended river otter squinted its eyes as we rudely blinded it before ducking away from us and submerging in the water. All of us stopped our frantic thrashing and panted before turning inward to make eye contact. In our wild sprint, we'd all joined Eli among the wet and waterlogged. Slowly, we broke into laughter. "All right, that may be the most terrified I've ever been on one of these expeditions," Jackson chuckled. "That scared the piss out of me." "Literally," Eli said, looking down. "You all may want to clear away." "Shut up," Heather splashed him, wiping her own face and sighing. "God, when people said they heard things out here, I thought for sure it was just going to be owls or some shit. What the hell was that?" "There's no way it was the otter," I chuckled nervously. I was amused by the whole situation myself. But admittedly, I was still pretty freaked. It came from way past it. "It could have been a bird call," Jackson pondered, looking back to the shadows we heard the sound from. "There are some animals that sound creepy like that. Hell, even mountain lions at night sound like women screaming." "Maybe," Eli agreed. "But whatever it is, I don't think I care to find out. Was that a good enough fill for this trip? We all got a good kick of adrenaline, and we're soaking wet. So I think that's a win in my book." Finally, having an out, I jumped in. "Yeah, honestly, even if that was an animal, I don't know if it's one we want to see. Not if it sounded like that. I think I could chalk that up to ghost proof and be happy." "What? Seriously?" Heather scoffed. "Guys, we've already hiked for an hour. The glade isn't much further. We may as well go the rest of the way. I thought the whole goal was to do what everyone else couldn't, remember?" Eli made a face. "Heather, did you not just hear that? There's no way you want to go closer to whatever that was. I was just going along with the animal thing to keep from freaking, but it was not natural. It kind of sounded mechanical," Jackson said, "like an instrument." "Okay, and so what?" Heather shrugged with a smile, trying not to seem too eager. "I thought the whole reason we did these trips was to find the paranormal, and now that we finally got something truly weird, we just want to run? Well, the real paranormal is a lot freakier than convincing ourselves we heard something," Eli said. Heather kept her face high for a moment, trying her best to still win us over with confidence, but when she saw that nobody was biting, not even me, she broke with a sigh. "Well, I'm still going to go. It can't be more than 5 more minutes of walking." Sticking the GPS out, she handed it to Eli. He shook his head. Heather, no way." "What?" "I'll be fine. I can just follow the rope back. I'll be right behind you guys by the time you get back to the car." "No. Nah. I know what you're doing," Eli threatened. She cocked her head. "What am I doing?" "You know that if you go alone, we're not going to let you." "No. Seriously, I want you guys to go back to the car. I don't want you to be miserable out here if you're done. I just really want to know what's up with this place." Heather's eyes fell on me as she said that, and suddenly guilt weighed heavy in my stomach. I sensed she was being genuine, so I shouldn't have felt bad if I wanted to leave. But it wasn't that. Like I said, Heather was ride or die. She'd followed me into more places than I could count, and all of it was for nothing. Now, here we were with something that actually had potential, something I'd looked for my entire life, and I was running from its literal call to adventure. What kind of friend would I have been if I'd made Heather go at it alone? "I'll come too," I spoke softly, a smile turning at my lips. "Well, I guess we all go then." Jackson jumped in. "We aren't just going to let you two get lost out here." Heather tried to protest. "No, guys, seriously, I don't want you to." Yeah. So noble. Thanks for the offer. "Come on, ladies," Eli sighed, brushing past us and following the GPS he now held in his hand. Heather turned back at me with a beaming smile, then quickly faced forward. tagging close behind a grinning Eli. I was happy they were smiling in that moment. Jackson and I were too. I think it was the last moment that any of us ever did. As we approached the glade, patches of land once again became visible among the oaks. There were mainly plateaus of mud and shrubs. Nothing stable enough to walk on, but it was at least nice to see land again. Eli was leading now since he had the GPS, but the string was still our guide. Its slimy, slick coat gunked our gloves as we tugged along it, shining our beams in every direction to make sure nothing caught us off guard again. As we moved, that squeal on the horizon kept looping in my head like a bad song, making my skin crawl and itch the closer we got to its source. I imagined how much more chilling it would have been to hear from the distance we now stood. Only a few yards from the grove. Ahead I could see it. The trees got denser a dozen yards ahead, then beyond. Opened up into a small pond the size of a neighborhood cul-de-sac. The trees had been ominous with our lights dancing between them, but somehow the open space was even more foreboding. The still, algae-topped water could hide anything below, and with the fisherman's story still fresh in my mind, I kept thinking about that pale, naked man with soulless eyes rising from the depths. Before we reached it, however, there was one more stop, one final chance for us to turn around. Protruding from the water a few yards in front of us, our flashlight skimmed across a small island of muck and pond scum, a plot of land just barely gasping above the surrounding flood. The rope led straight onto the platform, but there was no tree that it was tied around this time. Instead, it roped onto something nestled among the shrubs that contrasted the dark muck harshly. As we approached with caution, I tried to make out what it was, but something paused our progress. "Ow, shit," Eli suddenly blurted. We all hesitated behind him, and our heads popped out of line to see what the holdup was. "You good, man?" Jackson called. "Yeah, there was just a huge-ass thorn caught on the rope that stuck me, punched straight through my glove." We broke formation and sloshed forward, gathering around to investigate. Eli held his hand beneath the beam of his light until one of us offered our own, to which he plucked out the pale barb that had stuck into his hand. It was a milky white and straight like a needle. I furrowed my brow, finding the color and shape odd for a thorn bush, then turned to check the spot in the twine that he got bit by. "Oh shit," I gasped, running my beam along the rope. The whole thing was covered in them. They weren't all as big as the one that got Eli, but beneath the mud and grime that had been coating the string, I finally saw them. Tiny little barbs frayed from their binding. At first I thought the twine was just old and tattered, but the closer I looked, the more I noticed it was by design. The quills all furrowed out in the direction we'd come from, and as I checked my glove, I noticed there were several that had caught the latex but not been able to puncture. My breath grew rapid as I hastily plucked them out and threw them away from me. Eli and Jackson turned to see what I saw, then grew worried looks on their faces. Eli tugged to lose his glove and looked down at his palm to find that the spot where he'd been pricked was already turning red and inflamed. The three of us were so confused and horrified that we hadn't even noticed that Heather had strayed a few feet away. Before any of us could commentate on the matter, she called out with utter distress in her voice, "Oh my God!" The three of us turned to her, then looked past where she was looking. On the island, the pale objects in the bushes were finally visible. Bones. More specifically, a rib cage. They were far too large to be humans, but bones were bones nonetheless. Almost in a trance, we all sloshed closer, our collective hearts banging the same dread-filled drum. It was a cow, large and half stuck in the mud. Its legs had sunk beneath the murk as it collapsed onto its side, leaving only its top half exposed. Its neck ran in a jumbled mess of parts to where its skull lay half peering out at us. But all of that was only the parts that we could confidently make out, because while it was clearly a cow's skeleton, something was horribly, horribly wrong with it. Scraps of flesh and fur still clung to bits and pieces of it, as well as a strange spongy, red meat, porous with holes and glistening in our lights. Its bones in places along the ribcage had seemingly grown outward, fusing together at spots to make solid bridges, almost like a barrel of bone and marrow. All of that maybe could have been explained away by strange decomposition conditions or birth defect, but what we couldn't deny was what covered the rest of it. Along its femurs and spinal cords were strange bubbles in the bone, bumps like the burrows on a tree. Half its skull was unrecognizable this way. A cloud of strange lumps like its face had boiled into a froth, then hardened. Bubbles was a very intentional word choice, because that's exactly what they were. Certain parts of the bone had cracked and fallen away, showing that the lumps were hollow. It was as if the beast liquefied, then hardened in a matter of moments. None of us had any words, and none of us could move, only stare down at the abhorrent thing glued to the swamp floor beneath our feet. I remember as we all tried to process what we were seeing, I could only muster one single, horrifying thought. A body this decayed would have certainly been sunken beneath the water during the flood. That meant it was fresh, and somehow still missing its skin. How did a cow get out here? Heather muttered. Why does it look like that? Jackson tried to bring us back down with logic, his comforting form of denial. Still, the frantic shudder in his breath betrayed his words. It must have been a pasture cow that wandered off from a nearby field. The swamp gases. Maybe it fucked with its decomposition. Swamp gases. Heather laughed with no humor to her tone. Jackson, you need nuclear waste to do that to a body. What the fuck is this? I don't know. I cut in, but we've seen enough. We need to leave. Now. Heather looked down at the body, with wide eyes and shallow breath, nodding in agreement. Seeing her go from so adamant to continue to downright petrified only compounded my fear. I had never seen the girl so afraid in my entire life. If even she felt something was wrong, then something was undoubtedly wrong. Finally, we were all in agreement to leave, but even though we'd taken that last chance, it was too late. A sloshing from the clearing ahead made us all jump and stagger back, whipping our beams up into the shadow. The sprawling pool before us ignited beneath the ghastly white beams of our flashlights, and there it emerged, a pale figure wearing no clothes, mouth agape in dark sockets, staring holes through us. The man from the story hadn't done the horror justice. Its skin was loose and haggard on its skeleton, like it was nothing more than a cheap rubber suit, and its hair was greasy and foul. Its feet were still hidden below the water, but its fingers were nothing more than limp, dangling flaps that dripped marsh water as it slowly rose from the pond. It wasn't until I noticed the dark spots on various parts of its form that I realized its true nature. Dark spots like its sockets. They weren't marks or black, soulless eyes. They were holes. Holes in a suit of skin stretched up on some unseen skeleton rising out of the water. Its open mouth and sunken brow suddenly looked less like a haunting wail and more like a horrified scream frozen in time. A cry for help that never came. As its feet crested the water, those awful, flayed feet that flapped loosely in the night breeze, I saw what was holding it up. A mountain of that spongy red meat soaked in mud and algae, a tangle of white, curved bone winding up and disappearing in its hollow puppet. Pale, worming tendrils waved from the holes in the crimson flesh, not dissimilar to the ones on the rope we'd been holding, and my stomach turned over in my gut. That wasn't the end, though. In the fraction of a moment that I was able to take all of that in, more bubbles began to froth in the clearing around us. From the water rose even more suits of skin, all with the same desperate, wailing expression gasping at their face. Men, women, animals of every kind that were stretched in abnormal ways, as if whatever was holding them up didn't quite know what to make of their various forms. I prayed that the smaller human suits I saw weren't what I believed them to be. None of us screamed or made a sound. We just turned to run. The water had never felt thicker as we splashed into it, making a break back the way we'd come. I turned over my shoulder, horrified that I might see the figures gliding through the swamp after us, but instead I saw something worse. Eli wasn't moving. He was still perched on the island, staring vacantly off into the bog. I could see by his posture that he wasn't sharing the same fear that we were. In fact, he looked almost calm. Eli, let's move. I shouted, my voice breaking with utter terror. Still, it scared me more that he didn't move. He didn't even flinch. I knew then and there that something was wrong. Whatever was in that water had him already, and it was too late. Still, I began charging back. We couldn't leave him. Not here. Not with these things. My boot sloshed out of the water back on the mud just in time to see the full horror set before me. Dozens of bodies conglomerate together, flies flocking and buzzing in and out of their holes like some sick sort of hive. Then, in the middle of them, one last body bubbled up. It wasn't human this time, nor animal. It was pure, incomprehensible flesh. A mountain of soaking meat filled with excited white worms that squirmed and danced in the hot swamp air. Spines and large ribs stuck out from its serpentine mass that stiffness had been stolen. They seemed to shift and writhe beneath my flashlight like tentacles, snapping straight at random and releasing harsh clacks. From its center spread large blankets of red tissue, almost like petals on a flower, and they too seemed to jitter and vibrate in the air like it was alive. Its head was nowhere at all, just a large, gaping pit plunging into a darkness of its body, a darkness that several pale ropes ran into. The string that we'd been following went taut, and from the water arose even more, running off into the woods in every direction. I felt mad looking at the creature, my brain hardly fathoming that something so horrifying might exist. Unable to bear any longer, I reached out for Eli's hand. "Eli, please. Let's go." My palm gripped around his hand, the one that had been pricked with a thorn, and my body went numb as it crumpled in my grasp. The skin wadded in on itself like I was grabbing a latex glove filled with water, and inside I could feel hard bits floating around like chunks in stew. Bile would have risen to my throat if it could, my swirling brain unable to take any more. But I was shock numb as Eli turned back to me, his face vacant and blank and his eyes pouring blood. Behind him, the vile flower of flesh and bone released a sound from its pit that vibrated my teeth and made my head pound. A sound like a coarse violin string being scraped. Eli turned back to it, as if in a trance, then began moving closer into water, his skin sagging as he went. I could barely move as tears streamed down my cheeks, the image of my friend sinking below the murk etching into my memory for the rest of my days. A harsh yank from my right brought me back down to reality, and I turned to see Heather tugging me along, her own face slick with tears and snot. She called out to me, but I couldn't hear her. The world had gone silent. Still, her expression demanded loudly without sound, and my body followed it instinctively. Run. Story 3. I work at a museum. There's a pedestal that's almost always empty, and its plaque says, "Do not look when occupied." I've posted here before. This job I got from the dark web asked me to watch over a rather strange exhibition. I feel I'm not alone, but the pay as well, and my first day here didn't raise enough questions for me to quit. The next days after my first contact with whatever was there went on peacefully. I mean, as peacefully as they could. You know what happens when the seed of fear is planted into someone's mind. They start to notice things and automatically shape them out as weird. Any temperature shift or any groaning of the wood nourished that seed already nailed into my brain like a parasite. My eyes would dart to random corners of the rooms, impatient and ready for something, anything to pop out of frame and scare me. I felt swallowed by the huge warehouse, unable to see exactly what was digesting me. Someone said on this forum that I should check if the exhibition was advertised online in any way. However, I didn't know what name to search up. The offer and the lady had only referred to it as a prestigious temporary exhibition, and nothing more. On my 5th day, I decided to start looking up the exhibits. I was sitting at my desk, my back stiff from hours of doing nothing, and I loaded up the browser to type, "The painter exhibit do not look when occupied." I waited anxiously for the results to be generated. Some forum entry briefly mentioning that they were looking for someone with connections in the art curator world. I assumed not the usual art curating, because they had a potentially new exhibit that could cost a lot of money. Some blog about soul trapping, but I didn't really understand the connection. A few pictures with an empty pedestal that I skimmed through. I don't know why, but those were the most disturbing part. After day 8, temptation dripped down from where it was trapped in my mind and my heart. I looked up to the paintings. There was something I had missed before. I could feel it. I don't know how I knew, but I did. I got up and walked to my mother. The sea landscape that had shown me nothing when I first looked. I stared at it for as much as I could. Just me and the painting in the empty warehouse. The more I stared, the more I realized that the painting seemed to be moving. I know that must have been a trick of the mind, something invented by my bored brain. And yet, something really did move. It was shaking a little, a flicker of light into the darkened sky awaiting the storm. It was there and terribly real. I leaned in a little closer, and suddenly the flicker disappeared, but something in the painting leaned in, too, as if to also have a closer look. I jumped back. I didn't understand what I had seen. It was impossible to describe. The thing jumped back, too. I stared in sheer confusion, until relief and embarrassment washed over me. The fucking painting had protective glass over it. I'd seen my own fucking reflection in the waves. But, you know, as all good things, the relief ended when I remembered the flicker I'd seen. It was back now, and right next to my reflection, I could make out a woman's face. Behind me, it was as if my body had been physically hit. I flinched and looked back, greeted by nothing. I took a step to the side, staring at the next painting of a dense forest, titled My Father. Only, I was looking at the reflection of an elderly man next to mine. How could that be possible? The title wasn't what was painted, but of what the glass reflected. I took half a step to the side, reading the title of the next painting in the corner of my eye, The Sleeper in the Corner. I moved in front of it and looked at the painting, concentrating on the glass. In the corner of the room, right where my desk was, I could make out the reflection of someone crouched over. What the fuck? I said out loud, turning my head so quick that my neck hurt. No one was there. Bullshit. No one I could see was there. With the corner of my eye, I read the next title. The Open Mouth. My blood ran cold. My heart was pounding uncontrollably in my chest, making me dizzy, either sending too much blood or not enough. I gasped and slowly stepped toward the desk, in the spot where I'd seen a reflection. I didn't bump into anyone invisible. If I looked at the painting again, would it be titled differently? For fuck's sake. Right then, the entrance door opened. I almost shat myself at the sudden noise. The lady from the first day stepped in. Hi, I just wanted to check on you, see if things are going well. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely weird stuff happening. Kind of an eccentric exhibition you got going on here. I don't own it. She walked all the way to the back, slowly, taking her time to inspect each of the exhibits. When she came back, she didn't even seem surprised to see that the stack of tickets hadn't gotten smaller. I realized I had left a tab of the pictures of empty pedestals on my laptop, and I turned it so it wouldn't face her. Good job. You're doing well, she muttered. One thing, though, sometimes it'll try to trick you. Ooh, to look at the pedestal. Just be careful. Again, we appreciate your discretion. Right. She left without saying goodbye. I sighed and turned the laptop back to me. I stared at the picture of the empty pedestal. It looked just like the one in the warehouse. I saw my reflection on the monitor, and then I saw another flicker of reflection that turned into a silhouette. I watched it glide across the laptop screen right where the empty pedestal was. Then I watched it lean over. Now, the pedestal looked like it was occupied. I stared at it for a few seconds before realizing what had happened. I quickly slammed the laptop shut and looked behind me. Fuck, that didn't count, right? That didn't count. I clocked out earlier that day. I hope they didn't mind. That didn't count, right? Story 4. What happened to my grandparents' balcony? I was 7 years old when this happened. I like to think I'm just misremembering, that something more scientifically plausible happened instead. I hope so. I've read stories where characters had lifelike dreams they truly thought were real. But I've also read stories where something obviously real and strange happens, yet the main character still stupidly convinces himself it was a dream. Back then, I knew the difference between dreaming and being awake. I felt very much awake. For whatever that's worth, I used to believe in God. I don't know what I believe anymore, but as a kid, I followed my family's faith. I was pretty good about it, believing and praying and all that, but I could never shake the feeling that God was seeing everything I did judging me anyway. I'd stay up late some nights worrying about what he'd say and do once I reached heaven. I know he's supposed to be this divine being without a body, but as a kid I imagined him as a disembodied, ethereal head with flowing, tendril-like hair hanging up in the sky. I'd space out in class a lot and see him in the rolling clouds, imagining strands of his tentacle hair holding brushes, painting heaven and earth into existence. One day in July 1997, I was at my grandparents' apartment while my parents were out. I was sitting with my grandmother on the balcony, playing with my Tamagotchi while she read a book. She must have had to go do something, because she left me on the balcony alone. It had an ornate, grayish tan, concrete railing. I was too small to see above it, but I could still peer through the slats between the bars. We were on the 7th floor, so we had a good view of the area, all the houses and familiar streets and trees at the forefront, all the mountains and electrical towers further out from the city. There was also a bird's nest on the awning above the balcony door, and at some point whatever bird that lived there had returned, so I watched it. I remember thinking how pretty it looked in the pink sunset. When I felt the first tremors, my instincts assumed it was an earthquake, that some supervillain had set off a bomb somewhere, that the building was collapsing. But through the railing I saw nothing scary below. No cracks in the earth or rubble falling off the complex. Just people going about their day, oblivious. I called for my grandparents through the screen door, but neither of them responded. The bird flew off behind the building. When I looked back out through the railing into the horizon, I swear a new mountain stood in the distance. It wasn't like the other mountains. It was all wrong. Asymmetrical, bulky at the bottom and top, but caving inward towards the middle, pitch black, with jagged, curving shapes poking out the peak like dead trees. It blended in well enough to the far away, dim afternoon haze. I honestly doubted myself for a bit, trying to convince myself that the new, weird mountain had always been there, and I had simply never noticed. But it moved towards me, its base shifting forward from one side, and then another like a person walking in a floor-length dress, sluggish like wading through water. Hulking arms lifted from its sides, letting the sky in through the gaps they left. Each step shook the world. I wanted to scream for my grandparents, my parents, the neighbors, but I didn't. I didn't run back into the apartment either. I still don't know why. Science can probably explain it. It can probably explain all of it. The thing got closer and closer, its shadow spilling onto the building, its body obscuring the setting sun. It phased through all the buildings and cars and telephone poles, and people like it wasn't fully there. One dark, beady, eye-like shape near the top shifted and looked down at me with a white, pinprick pupil. It groaned like grinding metal even without a mouth, and came to a stop in front of the apartment. I remember feeling like my parents were mad at me for drawing the walls with crayons. That same mixture of fear and shame and unavoidable knowing, but a million times worse. Like the universe stood before me and loathed every cell in my body for existing. The thing lowered its head. When its eye reached balcony level, my reflection shone back at me, and I just knew I was going to die. I was going to die forever, and whatever happened after, this thing was going to be there, hating me the whole while. The protrusions on its head writhed, flexing in my direction. One wormed its way down quicker than the rest, destroying a chunk of the balcony, then grabbing me and lifting me up by the legs. It hurt in a way I still wince at every other day if I let it, like being touched by the sun but colder than winter. I clung to the intact part of the railing, finally screaming my head off, my limbs straining against the thing's impossible pull. I still don't understand how, but I blinked only to find myself hanging from the railing, gravity tugging me down, then my grandmother lifting me up. The giant was gone. She asked me what happened, but I couldn't say. I cried a lot. My grandfather showed up in the bedroom afterwards, tired and grouchy, and soon my parents came to pick me up. My grandmother explained how she found me, how there was now a chunk of the balcony missing along with the balcony above. My parents half cried, half yelled at her for leaving me alone, then did the same to me, something I never experienced from them again. They asked how I ended up clinging to the outside of the railing. I still don't know how to answer them. Later in life, I talked about it with my grandparents. As far as the inspector could tell, there had been some structural weakness in one of the upper unit's balconies that led to a chunk of it falling off and hitting their own. They had it repaired. I never told them about the massive monster. Both of them are long gone, and my deepest regret is not visiting more often. I want to believe this was some hallucination or nightmare or faith-fueled something or other that tinted how I saw an otherwise mundane incident. But I've never had a similar experience since, and I'll never, ever forget how I felt. I'll never forget each colossal footfall reverberating through my skull and rattling my teeth. The monster that stood taller than a skyscraper and absorbed every hue into its lightless body. The bruises on my legs from how tightly it held me. Every color of the rainbow splattered on my skin. Some still staining parts of the restored balcony and surrounding brick. Now here I am, a 35-year-old too terrified to draw or paint or go outside, renting an apartment while wishing desperately I could afford a single-story home, where words are all I have that no one in their right mind would believe. And the only thing I pray for anymore is that, whatever that being was, it wasn't the God from my daydreams. Story 5. They called that place a colony, and I was the entertainment. I don't know where to start. My name is Gabriel, or at least it was. If anyone from my past is reading this, they probably think I'm dead. Maybe I am. After what I lived through, the line between being alive and being a monster is very thin. It all started with a scream in the dark, a high-pitched scream that cut through the night, and then silence. I woke up with a taste of iron in my mouth, like I had bitten my tongue. But worse, it was dark, damp. The sound of dripping water was my only company, besides the chains on my wrists. The cell was tiny, the size of a shipping container. The kind of place where you can scream until your lungs give out and no one will hear you. But someone was watching me. I could feel it. In the first days, if you can even call them that, I realized I wasn't alone. There were others. Murmurs in the corridors. Insane laughter that sounded like it was from a horror movie. And the smell? My God, the smell of raw and rotten meat. Someone was eating something they shouldn't. I met a guy, Andre. He whispered through a crack in the wall. He said we were lab rats. They take people no one will look for, he said. The homeless, illegal immigrants, addicts. They test how long it takes for us to turn into animals. He laughed, a laugh with no joy, just pure desperation. Hours later, I heard his teeth tearing into something they threw into a cell. He cried while he ate. I learned quickly that trust was a death sentence. There was a traitor among us. Marina tried to organize an escape. I almost joined her, but something held me back. 3 days later, she came back, but it wasn't Marina anymore. Her eyes were empty like a doll's. She walked like the guards. Some of us had already become theirs. When they took me to the room, I thought it was the end. 2 guards with gas masks, the old-fashioned kind that make a noise when they breathe. They strapped me to a chair. There were scalpels, saws, but they didn't touch me. Instead, they turned on a projector, and then I saw my mother in our kitchen drinking coffee. So normal until she turned her head. Her eyes were black holes, leaking something that wasn't tears. Her mouth opened in an impossible way and she screamed. A voice from a loudspeaker said, "You abandoned her. You knew she was sick. You ran away." It was a lie. It had to be. But after hours of that, with the chains forcing me to watch everyone I ever loved being tortured and blaming me, part of me started to believe it. Time lost all meaning. I wasted away to bone. My hair fell out. I started talking to myself. One night, I woke up with a piece of warm meat in my hand. I don't know where it came from. I don't know what it was. I ate it, and I cried while I ate. I wished for more. That's when the man in the next cell made me an offer. "I can get you out of here," he said, "in exchange for information, in exchange for betraying the others." I felt disgusted, but also tempted, until I discovered the truth. A tiny camera hidden in the mold. There were several. They weren't just watching us. They were filming us. This was entertainment. A snuff show for rich people. I wasn't a prisoner. I was an actor. The chance to escape came when a guard left the door open for 3 seconds. I grabbed his head, and smashed it against the wall. I felt pleasure. That scared me, but I was beyond fear. I led a revolt. Dozens of us, skeletal and bloodied, massacred the guards. It was brutal, inhuman, until we reached the final door. It was a huge room with a giant mirror covering the wall, and we saw monsters, mutilated faces, destroyed bodies, humanity erased. Someone started screaming. Marina, or what was left of her, cut her own throat. Others followed. A mass suicide. Seeing themselves was a final torture. I stood still, looking at my reflection. Was that still me in there? That's when the guards came back, and they took off their masks. It was Andre, Marina, the man with the offer. All of them. Prisoners who had become executioners to survive. Sorry, Andre whispered, as he handcuffed me again. It's you, or me. I didn't fight back. I just laughed, and then the lights came on. Behind the mirror, which was just one-way glass, was the audience. Men in suits, women in dresses, champagne, applauding, as if it were a play. When the scalpel finally cut, I thanked them, because it was over. Or maybe it wasn't. You can never really know in the colony. Story 6. The Mustache Man. Warning: child abduction plus implied cannibalism. When I was in 2nd grade, I got abducted by the Mustache Man. It was a regular Friday around October. I remember the morning of that Friday extremely well, from my mom packing up my lunch, to her putting my homework in my Disney-branded backpack, and then her tying my shoes. She told me to remember to go in the car dismissal line, the line where kids would get picked up by car. As me and a childhood friend of mine, Zuri would have a play date / sleepover together that night, and that Zuri's dad was going to pick us up. Me and Zuri were in the same class together since pre-K, but when our class had a swap in September, we got split up, only occasionally meeting during recess or PE. After the school day ended, the principal announced on the school's intercom, "Car rider students, you are now dismissed." Me and a few other students walked out into the hallway and towards the administrators near the exit gate. I stood next to Mrs. DeMarco, looking for Zuri's dad to pop out of crowds of parents, shuffling from the parking lot and onto the sidewalk / grass behind it. Then I heard, "Claire, Claire." I looked over to find a man waving at me as he walked towards the gate. He was tall, sort of had a hunchback, with a round face and long, thin legs, with the exception of his torso and arms being somewhat muscular. His hair was stylized, a belating comb-over, with a long mustache and goatee. He greeted himself as Zuri's Uncle Daniel, stating that he was there to pick us up. I gave Mrs. DeMarco the thumbs up, in which she asked, "Where is he, baby?" I pointed towards Uncle Daniel. He waved as a single, and she dismissed me. I ran towards him, which he grabbed my arm really tight and roughly, and led me to the crowds of distracted parents. I asked him, "Wait, what about Zuri?" He replied within a quick indescribable shudder, his walking speed matching his alien language. It was extremely hard to keep up with him, especially since he was practically dragging me through purses, hands, and with my backpack, getting caught between those things. He explained that his brother, Zuri's dad, was working late, and since her parents only shared a car, he called Uncle Daniel to pick us up and take us home. It was only until we got into the car when I realized a gigantic red flag in the middle. "Where's Zuri?" The man turned to me, sitting alone in his back seat, painted with a face of confusion, smiling as he told me, "I already picked up Zuri from school. She at my sister's house. You know her mom's house. My sister's. I thought her dad was your brother." The old paint job of confusion was painted over by the tones of realization, shock, and fear, followed by another internal realization of mine. Both of Zuri's parents are black. If he's her dad's brother, why is he white? I was a pretty shy and gullible kid, still am, but not as much as I used to be. But back then I wouldn't talk to people I didn't know, especially if it was adults. But the more I sat, the more I thought about it. The more I thought about it, the more I began to figuratively slap myself in the forehead, thinking how stupid I was for believing in such a bold-faced lie. For the whole drive, the mustache man talked about his days in elementary and as a kid, not once mentioning Zuri's parents. He asked me about my day, if I had any tests, what I ate, if I had a crush on anyone. Overall normal stuff, if you were talking to a guardian or parent, but not a complete stranger. The drive took around 30 minutes, which for our district zoning is like driving to a complete different school zone. For reference, at the time my house was 5 minutes away, and Zuri's was roughly 13 minutes away from the school. I looked out the window to find myself in an area I wasn't used to. If I remember correctly, it was a cul-de-sac with brick houses, trees with no leaves, and huge spaces between the houses. He led me inside and shut the door behind me. It was really dark inside, with the only source of light being presumably in the living room, dim and yellow. He looked at me and smiled, noticing the clear fear and nervousness on my face. I asked, "Where's Zuri?" with a tremble in my voice. His smile was hidden by the palm of his hand, and in a muffled voice stated, "Oh, she's probably downstairs playing with some toys." He then walked in front of me, squatted down, and said, "Wait right here, I'll go get her," before tapping his finger on my nose, boop, and exiting to a nearby room. I heard a door open and the sound of dress shoes creaking on old wood to then clicking on concrete. I knew I was in some sort of trouble. No, some sort of danger. I sped walk to the door and tried to open it, only to be met without a single budge. My heart began to beat even faster. My once full of hope heart, being a victim of genocide from panic. But like a refugee, hope was still alive. Hope that Zuri would show up in the basement, or her dad would walk in, or my mom would pick me up. But just because I had hope doesn't mean my chances would change to the good. I regretted going inside. I regretted getting inside the car. I regret telling Mrs. DeMarco that he was a one. I regret going to school that day. I regretted not listening to my mom. I didn't notice my tears hugging my eyes for comfort, but I did notice one thing, a house phone connected to the wall. I quickly walked toward the phone, but it was over the counter. I found one of the dinner table chairs and pulled it out to reach the phone. I picked the phone off its receiver and dialed 911. It ranged and beep deep dash. 911, what is your emergency? I replied in a whisper, "Help me. I was kidnapped. I don't know where I am and I want to go home." Even as a kid, I thought, how pathetic of me. Those weren't the words I thought, but it was a feeling I felt. It was disappointment, it was shame, it was fear. That was all she needed. Without hanging up, I had the phone on top of the holder, instead of inserting it correctly. Hurried everything back in place before the mustache man could return. I already heard his loud footsteps coming upstairs. He yelled, "Claire, come down here, Zuri's here." I didn't respond. "Claire?" Footsteps rushed upstairs at a steady crescendo, walking into the kitchen to see if I was still there. "You all right? See, can I leave?" I asked in a hushed tone, like I was called answer to a question I didn't know how to solve. Have you ever seen a mask fully fall in real time? His jolly yet creepy mall Santa curled smile fall into an emotionless expression. He realized I wasn't falling for it anymore. Maybe that's what took the fun out of it for him. He slowly walked towards me, putting on a more gentle, yet less convincing mask, like a grandparent walking to greet you, till he was close enough to grab me by my hair and aggressively pull me toward the basement. I screamed and cried, "Please let me go, please." He screamed back, "I'll stop if you behave, and stop acting like a little bitch." So I listened. He then grabbed me by my hand and gently guided me toward the basement. I didn't notice until I was halfway down that the door behind me shut and clicked with a lock. I turned my head at the now shut door and turned back to descend further down. The basement was unfinished. It had a boiler in the corner, a single support beam in the middle, a big blue curtain that covered a corner of the room, and had a depressing yellow glow that I learned was possible by the sunset. It was a kind of room you could imagine where a creep would put kids in. I could hear everything in that room, from his footsteps to the loud munching sounds that came from his chips. I don't know how long I was down there, probably for a while, since the orangish hue became a dark brightish blue. But eventually I heard a set of 3 bangs coming from the front door. I held my mouth with my hands to keep it shut. I wanted to scream so bad, but with the chances of them not hearing due to the many layers of walls, I wanted to say my scream until I knew for sure they could hear me. I heard the mustache man's TV stop playing, his chair squeaking like leather. The silence was deafening. 3 more sets of knocking and doorbell ringing, until I heard a loud boom, followed by multiple pairs of stomping. It was right then and there when I removed my hands and screamed like never before until my lungs burned and I ran out of oxygen. The basement door was broken down, with an officer holding a flashlight toward me, and another carrying me out from the dungeon. At least 3 cop cars showed up, followed by a news anchor van. The officers placed me on the back seat of the police car with a blanket, in which I had provided them with all the details I could remember. Officers searched the entire house for the mustache man, with 9 units attempting to sniff him out, but they couldn't find him. When my parents arrived from the scene, my mother ran to me bawling her eyes out. Her face was puffy red and smudged with runny makeup. The officers investigated more into the house and found behind the curtain was a movie set with pictures of other missing children crossed out, and with other photos of children not yet crossed out, suspected to be other targets. Before you ask, no, it wasn't that kind of movie set. It was a table with hacksaws, hammers, restraints, and other medical supplies. And in his freezer, there were the remains of his victims: Jacob Jerky, Francis Angus beef, Samantha's pie, Brandon's creamy red ice cream, now with chips, and finally an empty container called fried Clary Ken nuggets. Complete. Sick. Fuck. Obviously, this had taken both a toll on me and my parents' mental health, and received counseling for it, provided completely free, without charge by the public schools district. Every now and then, I think back of the mustache man. I wondered if he'll come back for me, but judging by his most recent victims, it's safe to say I'm most likely in the clear. But if he does survive that long, and he's still watching me, I'll make sure to never have kids until he dies. Story 7. If you value your life, do not go fishing in Blackstone Quarry. I have worked as a conservation officer for the Department of Natural Resources for 15 years. Last week was my last. I don't even care that I was only a few years from receiving my piddly-ass pension from the state. I don't care if I have to spend the rest of my life picking gum and chewed up tobacco out of urinals at the truck stop. I am done. Being a game warden for 15 years will get you used to seeing some pretty nasty stuff. Animal entry will become as standard to you as $20 bills to a bank teller. And just like a bank teller, no matter how many you handle, you don't get paid anymore. If that were the case, I wouldn't have so many stains on my truck from gas station pizza. Much of your time will be spent dragging bloated roadkill out from the middle of the road. I've seen deer so distended that they will crack and split like an old basketball you left outside too much as a kid. This year, I was able to switch assignments and therefore areas. I don't know if it's because of my years of dedication and hard work, or just because my boss has looked at me like a charity case ever since my sister drowned 5 years ago. I don't care, it keeps them off my back. Also, this area doesn't have a highway cutting through the middle of it, so that means roadkill is at a minimum. A few months in, and I was really enjoying the freedom that the remoteness has given me. I rarely see any other wardens, so I can be a little more lax on the requirements and duties. My signal here is always spotty, so if I want to slack off a little and get lunch, I can just mute my radio and blame it on a bad connection. Then I am free to head to the diner a few miles up the street and chow down. The owner knows I am not supposed to do that, but she doesn't care. Hell, half the time I go there I see high schoolers smoking butts out of the ashtray or bumming cigarettes. It scared the shit out of them to see me pull up until they started to recognize I'm not a state trooper. Now when I go, they try to bum cigs off of me. I would tell them that I quit, and they would do their best to forget that next time they saw me. Part of the area I managed was a place called Blackstone Quarry. It was an old quarry for many years and provided the town with the majority of its income. Eventually the owner, Mr. Blackstone, started to ignore the geologist in pursuit of lining his pockets. And guess what? They hit water. A lot of water. Flooded the whole bottom of the quarry. Fearing potential litigation, Mr. Blackstone so generously decided to donate all the land to the government for a cheap price. They were forming a plan for a hydroelectric dam and the quarry's placement made for a good inundation zone. That way, if the dam were malfunctioned, the overflow would only fill the quarry more. It malfunctioned. The flood was for the most part contained. A few people, including a game warden, were swept away. But it was nothing a few greased palms couldn't cover up. Most families, like mine, just got a very sincere apology. They could have at least paid for flowers, let alone the $1,000 tombstone I had to inscribe her name on. All manner of new opportunities opened up. Countless creatures on the lake flooded into the quarry, and a new job as warden opened up. On the bright side, the town had a brand new scenic fishing spot, and I had a new job. Seeing the water did sometimes send a chill down my spine, but I only really had to go there in the winter when it was all frozen. And hey, maybe in some ironic twist, I could save another family from the same water that broke mine apart. On the third month, I found the first body. Winter had started to set in, and someone had decided their need for a cold fish outweighed the need to read the warning signs of thin ice over spring. They cracked right through into the center of the lake. They must have been an out-of-towner, because no one had noticed that they had been down there for days. They had eventually washed the surface when the ice waned after a streak of unusual warmer January days. The fish did a number on them. The body was frayed and shredded like a moth-chewed sweater. The most unusual detail was a circular puncture wound in what remained of the neck. As I stood to the scent of decay, our decay, the decay of my fellow human being, saturated the air in my nose and mouth. I could feel the liquid burn of vomit, slithering and twisting its way from my stomach and up my throat like a serpent. My mouth coated itself with frantic saliva. It's strange, you know. I've seen so many dead animals that I rarely even feel anything anymore. And yet, even though barely enough remained to tell me I was looking at a human, I could feel my body rejecting what lay before me. Some ancient forgotten voice in my mind would do nothing but just softly cry one word: run. It took smoking a whole pack of menthols in the gas station parking lot just to flush the stench of that air, the taste of that air, out of the back of my throat. I tried to quit that day. My boss Jeff sat me down and tried to rationalize that this can happen and that my job was so important I mustn't abandon it. I knew it was all bullshit. He just couldn't get anyone else to fill the position. I had told him that I wanted to help protect people and prevent what happened to Laura when I started the new assignment. He said that staying at this job is what Laura would have wanted. I hated it when he said her name. The word curdled in his acrid, tobacco-stuffed mouth like expired cream. I hated that I knew how that word would sound when he added, "I love you" before it. I hated him. He hated me. I knew it. He knew it. But unfortunately, he was right. Laura will be proud of me for doing what I'm doing. I was honoring her memory. So I went back to work, keeping a close eye on those who returned when the lake finally refroze, while keeping myself as far away from the water as possible. I would always keep an eye out, especially before sunset, to make sure no one was fishing after dark. When the time would come, people would side-eye me and my government plates and reluctantly pack up their saws and rods and head back home. I began to relax a little. The quarry was beautiful, almost hauntingly so. It had a hypnotizing natural beauty, despite its unnatural creation. I had heard very few things about that incident since. The body was matched up with a missing person report put out in the next town over. The rest of what I heard was just paranoid theories from the town drunks. It's funny how everyone's source is always They said that the coroners had to resort to dental identification. They said that the government had swept in and took the body away. They say that the government let a bunch of chemicals leach from that research lab nearby, and that's why the ice was so thin, and the snapping turtles get so big and so mean, and probably why they haven't had a steady job or relationship in 20 years. They sure knows a lot. Maybe someday one of these wise alcoholics will let me meet their buddy. So I can ask them why his friends won't shut the hell up. It was one night I was sitting by the quarry monitoring the fishers. It was a windy day, so not many anglers. Most everybody had left hours ago. I decided to pack it up myself a bit early. They wouldn't know. I would turn off my radio and leave in the truck. Lie that I called in at the end of my shift, but the signal had gotten lost in the valley. Then I would take a cursory look around and see if anyone remained on the ice and go home. As I walked around looking for any remaining fishers, I heard something. A woman was screaming, calling out for help. I had felt that same feeling when I saw that corpse. I heard that same ancient voice in my memory saying that same word, run. But the word felt different. I did need to run, but I needed to run towards it, to save this person from the same fate that fell upon my sister. So I did. I ran, ignoring the cold wind stinging my ears and burning my lungs. I ran as the screaming got louder and louder and the wind swirled the sound around my ears, twisting around me like rope. I ran. Saplings whipped my face and brush seized my feet, commanding me to stay in place. When I reached the shoreline, I looked out into the water. It was almost completely dark by then. With my flashlight, I probed the ice's surface. I spotted a large break in the ice about 20 yards out. I ran as fast as I could, ignoring any safety measures. I looked into the water, but I heard nothing, I saw nothing. There was no discarded fishing gear, no disruption of the snow to show someone had tried to clamber out of the water, just a clean break in the ice. The ice was thick, almost a foot, more than enough to support even the heaviest of fishermen. I fell to my knees. My fucking radio. How stupid am I? It was nowhere on my belt. I sprinted back to my truck, turned on my radio and, ringing every last whisper of air left in my lungs, called for assistance. Help arrived and scanned, scoured, did everything short of dredging the reservoir, yet they found nothing. No bodies were reported. No vehicles were found in any of the parking areas or on the sides of the access roads. Nothing. Days passed. No missing person report was ever filed in any of the nearby towns. I still had no idea where that sound came from, where that break came from. Weeks passed. The fishing increased, and so did my intake of nicotine. Public curiosity faded, and I started to feel like one of the guys that believes what they had to say. I started listening intently to rumors I had previously dismissed. I would pour through any records I could find that even mentioned the quarry or the government building nearby. Anything about deaths or disappearances before I started working here. Nothing. I could barely even find anything about the deaths in the flood. Just a few sparse obituaries in the newspapers. Another slow day of fishing passed, overcast and windy. The sunset did not even try to break the blockade of clouds it faced. It was now late February, and while still breezy, the wind didn't sound so murderous. I shuddered when I got out of my vehicle to make the rounds. The air felt like it did when I heard that scream. If I let my mind unfocus, the wind itself almost whispered to me about it. But I tried to stay focused. I turned as much away from the quarry as I could while still looking at it, and failed to light another cigarette. I condemned myself for always impulse buying those cheap lighters at the gas station. Defeated, I stuffed the lighter back in my pocket. I thought to myself maybe I could get a little buzz if I just chewed on it for a while. I went to walk my rounds and tell everyone to wrap it up and head to shore. The few remaining anglers gathered their things and whatever creatures they ripped from the depths and went to search for their vehicles in the fading sunlight. I heard it again, that same scream for help. I looked around to see if anyone else had heard, but everyone else had gotten into their vehicles and left already. I rushed out, flashlight and radio ready. I spotted a break in the ice. Far out into the lake, someone was thrashing wildly in the water. They were screaming. The closer I drew to them, the less the screams sounded like words and harsher and grittier it grew in my ears. Again, that ancient word entered my head, clawing its way to the front of my attention. This time it was only said once. Run. It echoed in my skull like a shattered wine glass. The feeling made me want to run away, not to run forward and save them. What is wrong with me? I needed to save this woman. I choked it down and ran closer. I could see her distant silhouette thrashing wildly, desperately trying to grasp at anything that she could hold on to. I hastened my pace, the adrenaline in my own cold, leaking eyes blurring my vision. As I dived forward to grab her outstretched arm, my flashlight and radio clattered onto the ice. In the dark, I felt around for her arm. It was bare, slick, and cold from the water. I pulled it as hard as I could, trying to free her. She tried to pull herself up from the ice, but she was heavy, resilient even. Her grip tightened. I felt a sting in my hands where she had grasped me. My feet edged closer to the water. She wasn't pulling herself from the ice. She was pulling me under it. I then realized her screaming had ceased. I strained my eyes to see her arm was black and shiny. And it was long, far too long. As I lay on my back trying to pull away, I realized that it stretched the entire length of my body. Its hand flattened and stretched out, wrapping its glistening, barbed edges around my hands. It now completely encompassed both of my hands down to my wrist. I could feel sharp jabs, almost like needles digging into the skin on my hands, tearing my flesh. Then I smelled it, that familiar odor that had invaded my senses and permeated my very skin. That odor that I had smelled when I discovered that corpse on the shore. That ancient word from that ancient voice grew from a vestigial echo into the only thing that I could hear. As my body was slowly dragged into the water, the suggestion of a face crested over the edge of the ice, lit cautiously by the discarded electric light. As the visage breached, I could see that large laceration seemed to separate the face into quarters. I saw as the quarters separated, and a thick barbed tentacle squirmed from between them. The face continued to peel back and bloom like a grotesque lily. The appendage rose overhead, twitching like a hound scenting the air, then struck towards me. I threw myself to the side as the probe plunged deep into the ice next to me. But my effort was not enough as one of the barbs sliced my cheek deeply. My molars felt cool air as my cheek split, forcibly lengthening my grimace. This cold sensation was quickly resolved by the searing heat of pain like no other. As the tentacle tried to wrench itself in the ice, I took the opportunity to free myself. I ripped my right hand free, and the grasping hooks of the creature rend my skin. Pain roared through my arm as my face felt the warm spray of my own blood. I reached for the pistol on my hip, trying to thumb the latch in my holster with my parody of a hand, making everything it touched slick and glossy. With great effort, I cleared the barrel from its holster and pointed it at the water. Bullets ripped into the ice and water. The pistol's harsh report whelmed my own cries of pain, anger, and primordial violence. I felt my left hand quickly slip free from its cutting bonds as the writhing dark mass of flesh reeled and slumped back into the water. I clawed my way back onto the ice and attempted to stand. No use. It was dark now, very dark. My ears were ringing and mucus heaved from my mouth and nose, forming a sea foam froth at the corners of my newly widened mouth. I pulled my way back toward the shore in my truck, holding the flashlight in my teeth so I did not miss it. I could hear the ice lazily creaking, as if waking up from a long sleep. Thump. I hastened my crawl. Thump. The slamming sent tremors through the stubborn ice beneath me. Very faintly, I swear I could hear a woman screaming. It sounded muffled. Softly, it resonated through the ice. Then again, thump. By the third thump, I had reached the edge of the quarry. It seemed to stop, but I could not be sure. I clambered into my vehicle and started the engine. I stripped the cold, wet clothes off my near hypothermic body. I turned the heat all the way up and twisted the radio volume knob so hard it snapped off in my hand, the harsh static cooing to me like a mother to her child. There I laid, curled up until the blackness at the edge of my vision slowly encompassed everything. I was told that some workers from the hydroelectric plant found me in my vehicle the next morning in a state of prolonged shock. The car battery drained and the gas tank dry. Blood and a viscous black liquid covered much of the upholstery and side panel of the vehicle. They did not say much about the nature of the wounds. They tried to convince me I must have taken a tumble off of one of the cliffs by the shore and got cut up by briars and rocks before falling through the ice. I did not try to fight them on the matter. I knew nothing I could say about it would be believed. They had already looked at me differently ever since I had reported the screaming. I had asked if they had searched, and they told me that the workers in the plant were unable to find any evidence of foul play, that my blood and fingerprints were the only thing found in the area, and the ice had already begun to refreeze by the time they had arrived, and that there was no reason to delve further. They were even kind enough to send flowers to my hospital room. Story 8. I keep hearing noises in our apartment. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. H.P. Lovecraft. I keep hearing noises in our apartment. It started 2 weeks ago, the night my roommate came back from her backpacking trip. She'd gone on a solo trip to find herself, the kind you do in your 20s after college to feel wonder, to realize people overseas are just like you, and that everything is expensive. She backpacked for 2 months from Eastern Germany to Istanbul. Along the way, she met many people, including an old Polish lady traveling with her strangely silent grandkid. The day Neri came back, she looked awful. Her clothes were dirty, speckled with white spots and stained with a dark brown liquid. She said her baggage had been lost at the airport. She showered. We ordered takeout, and she told me the highlights of her trip. By 10 p.m. we said goodnight and went to sleep. Our apartment is a 4-room place. The main living/dining room opens into a small kitchen, which sits between 2 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. From my room, the kitchen separates me from Neri's room. The first night after she returned, I woke in the middle of the night to a faint metallic noise. It came at regular intervals, a distant chime that sounded as if it came from the street, yet the metallic echo felt much closer. Ty, Ty, that was all I could hear. It even seemed like a pulse. Something was off. It lasted until sunrise. Needless to say, I didn't sleep so well. I thought neither did Neri. Her eyes were red, and she looked exhausted. But when I asked if she'd heard the noise, she said she hadn't. How is that possible? We sleep just a few meters apart. I thought maybe she was so tired she slept through it. I lied to myself. The next 4 nights were similar. By day, everything was normal, but every night the metallic sounds returned. They didn't follow a schedule. Sometimes they began at 11 p.m., sometimes as late as 2 a.m., but they always came. The second night, I could feel the glass in my window trembling with the pulse of the noise. By the 4th night, the pipes in the apartment were shaking. The sound had grown louder. Each morning I asked Neri if she'd heard anything. Her tired voice always said, "No." How could I sleep with those sounds? On the 6th night, I was still awake when the noise began. Neri had gone to bed early, and I stayed up watching TV. A few hours later, the sound returned, only this time was different. My skin went cold. It felt closer. The noise was angrier. It started with something like distant thunder, followed by a long, soft breath, as if someone were struggling to breathe through their mouth. I could feel the sound outside our apartment, as if it were standing in the hallway. I looked through the peephole, but saw nothing. My head rattled every time the thunder crashed outside the door. Even in my room, buried under pillows, I heard it. Teacher, ha, teacher, ha, without pause. Yesterday morning, Neri was gone. She wasn't answering my texts, and her room was locked. I had to know what was going on. I called the airline to ask about her lost baggage, only to learn she hadn't checked any luggage on the flight. Why would she lie? Neri didn't come home. Last night, I locked my door and slept with earplugs, as if that would help. But again, in the middle of the night, the noises came. The metallic chime was back, this time along with the thunder. I swear my room's doorframe rattled after every THRR, and I felt it in my chest, each one louder than the last. The whole apartment seemed to hold its breath. I froze for hours, my body locked in fight or flight. The temperature in the room dropped. Moonlit shadows shifted across the rattling walls, pulsating with the sound. I was in danger. Maybe it was a lack of sleep, but I started to feel a pattern in the noise, like waves rolling in and out. My heartbeat synced with it, pounding harder each time. I thought I might die right there. Then, as always, the sound stopped when the sun came up. I slept through the morning. Today, I woke to the sound of Neri coming back into the apartment. She's sitting in front of me as I type this. Her nails are caked with dirt, and she smiles as if nothing is wrong, humming a tune that sounds eerily familiar, at least in the intervals. Story 9. The AI I trained won't stop generating my dead friend's face. I haven't told anyone else. Who will believe me? An AI is haunted by your dead friend? They'd laugh me off the internet, but I'm not laughing, because it's been 2 years since Max died, and somehow he keeps showing up in every image I generate. It started as nothing more than a way to kill time. I've been messing around with an AI image generator for a few weeks, the kind you feed random prompts into, and it spits out art that looks almost human-made. Sometimes the results are beautiful. Sometimes they're funny. Sometimes they're nightmare-fueled by accident. I like testing its limits. I'd ask it for impossible things, like a fish playing guitar underwater in the style of Van Gogh, or a city floating on clouds lit by candlelight. The machine didn't care. It always gave me something. But then one evening, I typed in something simple, an empty street at night. The result looked fine at first. A narrow road, dim lamps glowing, shadows curling at edges. But in the bottom corner, blurred, half hidden behind a pole, there was a figure, a pale face, and not just any face. Max's. I remember leaning forward, squinting at the screen, telling myself I was imagining things. People see patterns everywhere. Faces in clouds, monsters in wood grain. This was the same, right? But the longer I stared, the more sure I became. The crooked nose, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the shadow of a smile. It wasn't just similar. It was him. Who Max was, I should back up. Max was my best friend. We grew up together, the kind of friendship that feels stitched into your bones. We spent summers building forts, winters huddled over video games, late nights sharing secrets we never told anyone else. And then 2 years ago he died. Car crash. Sudden. Brutal. The kind of death that doesn't give you time to prepare or say goodbye. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone. I went to the funeral in a daze, not believing the box in the ground contained the person who'd once laughed so hard he cried at my stupid jokes. For months afterward, I caught myself reaching for my phone to text him, only to remember I never really got over it. So when his face showed up in that AI render, my first thought wasn't horror. It was grief, a sharp, twisting ache, like the machine had dug up a ghost I'd spent 2 years trying to bury. I told myself it was a glitch. AI pulls fragments from millions of images online. Maybe it found someone who looked eerily similar. But the next day, I tried again. Different prompt this time. A busy New York street. The image popped up. Neon signs, crowds of people, cars streaming past. And there, in the crowd, half turned toward me, was Max. Not blurry this time. Clear. I stared at him. He was in the middle of the sidewalk, dressed in clothes he never wore in life. Dark hoodie, pale jeans, but the face was his. The same lopsided grin, the same eyes. And the worst part, he was looking straight at me. Everyone else in the image was walking, heads turned in different directions, blurred with motion. But not him. He was facing the camera, still and sharp. Facing me. I shut the laptop, walked away, told myself I was tired, seeing things, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Later that night, I opened the program again, typed another random prompt. A medieval knight in armor. The knight appeared, detailed, shining armor, sword at his side, and reflected faintly in the sword's blade. Max. This time his expression had changed. The grin was gone. His mouth was too wide, stretching wrong, twisted into something that looked almost painful. His eyes were darker, emptier. I closed the program, deleted my search history, told myself I was done with it. But of course I wasn't. Over the next week, I kept testing it, telling myself I needed to know. A dog chasing a ball. Max's face, blurred in the grass. A bowl of fruit. Max, reflected in the glass of a wine bottle. The ocean at sunset. Max, standing on the shore, half drowned, skin pale. It didn't matter what I typed. He always showed up. At first it was small, corners, reflections, background shapes. But then it grew. It got closer, more visible, more detailed, until one night I typed, "A classroom with empty desks." The image loaded. and he was sitting in the front row, full body, perfectly clear, smiling. That was the first time I noticed text. AI generators don't usually add words, not unless you ask. But at the bottom of the picture, scribbled like handwriting, was a single sentence. I'm not gone. I froze. My stomach dropped. I hadn't typed that. I hadn't asked for words. I shut the laptop again, hand shaking, sat in the dark, listening to my own breathing. For the first time, I wondered if it wasn't just grief, if this wasn't just coincidence, if something was wrong. That brings me to now. I've been writing this out, trying to make sense of it, hoping that putting it into words will make it sound less insane. But just now, while typing, I noticed something. The mirror across the room, there's movement in it, a pale shape, standing where I'm sitting, grinning as I type. I don't dare look up, but the reflection is smiling wider. I should have left the mirror alone. I should have thrown a blanket over it, turned it to face the wall, smashed it if I had to, but I didn't. I forced myself to look up. At first, nothing. Just my room, lit by the pale glow of the monitor. My reflection slumped in the chair, face pale and drawn. And behind me, empty. But then the reflection smiled. Not me, not my mouth. My lips were pressed tight, breath shallow, chest tight with fear. But in the glass, my reflection grinned, lips curling too wide, teeth too sharp. And I swear, though the glass was thin and cheap, I heard the faint scrape of laughter, like nails dragged across metal. I grabbed the mirror, yanked it from the wall, and shoved it face down under my bed. The sound cut off instantly, but my heart wouldn't stop pounding. That night, I slept with the lights on. The next day, I tried to tell myself it was stress, lack of sleep. I'd been pulling too many late nights with the AI, obsessing over things no one else cared about. Maybe I was hallucinating. I avoided the program all morning, forced myself to go outside, walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, listening to the crunch of leaves under my shoes. It should have been normal, comforting, but everywhere I looked, I saw him. A man walking his dog, same tilted head as Max. A kid riding his bike, same crooked grin. A car passed, and for a split second, in the driver's seat, I thought I saw his eyes staring back at me. I shook it off, went home, but when I stepped inside, my phone buzzed. One new notification. It was from the AI app. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't touched it since the night before. The notification just said, "You left me waiting." I deleted the app, or at least I thought I did, because an hour later, when I booted up my laptop to distract myself with YouTube, the program launched on its own. Prompt box open, cursor blinking, waiting. I didn't type anything, didn't move the mouse, but text started appearing anyway, slowly, one letter at a time. Hello. My chest tightened. Then another word, Max. I slammed the laptop shut again, told myself it was a virus, a prank, something explainable. But later that night, while brushing my teeth, I got another notification. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a photo taken from my laptop's webcam. Me, sitting at the desk, face pale, eyes wide. And behind me, leaning over my shoulder, smiling with his teeth bared, was Max. I dropped my phone. It clattered against the sink, cracked the case. My hands shook so bad I could barely pick it up again. I didn't sleep at all. By the next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. So I went to the cemetery. It had been months since I'd visited. Guilt twisted in my gut as I walked up the path. The October air was sharp. The trees half bare, dead leaves scattered like bones across the ground. I found his grave easily. The headstone was small, plain, his name carved into it. Maxwell Black, 2006 to 2023. I stood there for a long time, staring at the stone, whispering apologies under my breath. But then, a voice, not out loud, not in my ears, in my head. I'm still here. I froze, looked around. No one. The cemetery was empty. But the voice came again, stronger. You left me. You stopped visiting. You forgot me. I shook my head. No, I whispered. I never forgot you. The ground under the grave shifted, just slightly. The soil darkened, pulsing like something alive was buried beneath. And in that moment, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The AI wasn't just pulling his face from data. It was him. He was in there, and he wanted out. I ran home, slammed the door, locked it, but my laptop was already open, glowing. On the screen, a new image, not one I prompted, not one I wanted. It was my room, perfectly rendered. Desk, chair, bed, and sitting in the chair, Max, head tilted, smile sharp, eyes hollow, and beneath the image more text, scribbled like it had been carved into the screen itself. Let me in. I don't know what to do anymore. Deleting the app doesn't help. Smashing the laptop won't help. I know deep down he's already inside. Every reflection, every shadow, every screen, Max is there, and he's getting closer. Right now, as I type this, my webcam light just flicked on by itself. I don't dare look, but I can feel his breath on my neck. Story 10. I was late for class and wish I hadn't been. The blood on the ceiling never really dried. The image still burned in my mind. I pulled a bottle of beer out of the fridge, the cool bottle kissing my hand with a cold relief. I have a late lecture today and figure it couldn't hurt. It's not like I'm getting drunk, just something to take the edge off. It's not like one beer could make me any dumber than my classmates. They never fail to surprise me with their stupid questions and opinions. My brother Emmett always kept the fridge stocked, so I never complain and drink when I feel like it. I stepped over a lump of clothes, a few textbooks, and a couple boxes from pizza night, making my way over the table where my bag was sprawled out along with various assignments, textbooks, and some of my brother's garbage. I slid my Swiss Army knife from my backpack strap pocket and flicked the bottle opener attachment out of its red body. I popped the cap and guzzled the refreshing golden liquid. My brother walked out his bedroom, his eyes fixing to the bottle opener in my hand, a disappointed look forming in his dark brown eyes. "I don't get why you keep that thing," he said with that confident tone. The kind of confidence that cuts deep, whether it's kindness or cruelty behind it. "Well, I don't see a problem keeping it," I replied, a little annoyed. There is no point holding on to it just because it was Dad's. He was never there for us, and he made that clear until the very end. His words burned my ears like pouring alcohol on a fresh cut. It's just a knife. And besides, it's the only good one I have. My voice sounding meager as I bit the inside of my cheek. Whatever. He turned his back to me, piling his textbook and some crinkled papers into his bag. We should get to class. And besides, today's the day we finally get to show them how smart we are. A small grin washed over his face. I leaned my head back and chugged the rest of my beer. I locked the dorm door, and we made our way to our class, which was conveniently on the other side of campus. The halls are bleak and boring like usual. Think a cheap community college inside of a 1960s bomb shelter. Yellow peeling scale-like paint barely held onto the walls. We walked with decent pace through the many halls, which all looked bland and the same. The lights gave off their usual buzz. It's not like the normal buzz that most people are used to, the kind of buzzing that causes an instant migraine. We continued through the halls, not making eye contact with each other or anyone. We don't really chat much. I guess when you've known someone your whole life, eventually you run out of stuff to talk about. But he always speaks up when I need him, and sometimes when I wish I didn't need him. He's always been the better brother. Popular, good at sports, and good looking. Most parents say that they love their kids equally, but in reality, that's impossible. Even the best parents know there's always a child you like more. Classroom 311, we walked in the open door. The classroom was unimpressive, to say the least. This was not a lecture hall full of intellectuals. Think of a crammed high school classroom with poor lighting. I could feel the shift as I stepped through. The air turned stale and thick. Who would invent a building with no windows? We sat in our usual spot in the back corner, which was typically either unoccupied or a couple late students would sneak in and sit there. That made it our best bet to avoid the prying eyes of our instructor and students, if you want to call them that. Most of them were hardly students, since you'd expect college students to have intelligence above an 8th grade level, wouldn't you? They all stared at the instructor with glazed over eyes. This was an ordinary group of young adults you see on the street. Somehow everyone at the school was ugly. I'm not sure how a school could attract only deformed, weird, and misshapen faces. Sometimes they reminded me of rats. Yeah, I guess that's a good way to describe them. Rats, but obviously human, just rat-like. The instructor finished stating the exam rules and handed out our Unit 1 exam. I'm nervous, even though I shouldn't be. With my lucky number 11 pencil in hand, I opened the first page of the exam. The first couple were easy, but then I reached a couple of real stumpers. I looked over at my brother, who was peeking down towards his crotch. I knew he was using his phone. I didn't want to. I already have decent grades, way above passing. His head turned to me a little bit. Not try to make it too obvious. Bro used ChatGPT. We gotta get out of this shit school, he whispered audibly. The volume shocked me as my eyes darted around for onlookers, ears ringing. Section 2. There's one bright spot, one glimmer in the sea of decay. That's why when I finished the test, I didn't leave. I watched this girl, Maria. Every guy in the class probably thinks she's the hottest. They're right, but those vermin don't deserve her. I love how she dresses. She knows exactly how much to show and how much to hide. Calculated and intelligent, just like her. The light above her flickered as my eyes meandered up her physique. Please turn in your tests. I jumped. We were one of the first ones out of the room, and he pulled me to the side of the door. I saw you staring at her, eyes peering into my soul. Even though we are not twin brothers, I always felt that soul connection. Yeah, so what? You should talk to her. Please, for me? He's right, but I'm not good with the ladies like he is. I avoided eye contact with him and took a deep breath. Students were piling out of the door like a stampede. The whole world slowed down when she walked by, but she kept her head down. I swear I got out a high. Maybe it wasn't loud enough, but I did. It doesn't matter anyways. She wasn't looking. I turned back to him. He was clearly unimpressed. Well, that didn't go well, he said, noticing my disappointment. She'd be lucky to have you. Don't waste it. He grabbed me by the shirt and pulled me in the direction she was heading. It was easy to find her. She was wearing a blue top in a crowd of dull colors. We kept a steady pace behind her. I want to talk to her, but I know I'll lock up, shut down, and embarrass myself. And besides, I'm happy watching this goddess from afar. We continued through the halls, into a part of the school I'm not familiar with. This area is even darker, and the air feels moist and musty. I will never understand this maze of hallways and how it takes 10 turns to go from building A to building C. They probably want you to get lost so they can charge your parents for another semester. They couldn't even keep the time right between buildings. Somehow when I left building 1 it was 5:30, and I arrived at building B at 7:11. We were nearing the exit to the train station, and we both knew it. Don't be a pussy. Go talk to her, he said sternly, looking at me with intensity. I began to move my feet faster and made some distance, just behind Maria. A sound rumbled in my chest, but all that came out was a pathetic peep. She disappeared out the door, her blue shirt slipping away like a day's sky into dawn, and ultimately the dark of night. I could feel the same transition deep in my stomach. I let out a loud, long exhale. Good job, man. I seriously thought you had it this time, he said, clearly disappointed but somehow with no sympathy. My body vibrated, eyes and lips twitching uncontrollably. I heard the murmurs of students, the side eyes, the laughter. I felt the overwhelming urge to slap him. Dad never minded a bit of roughhousing. I remember that day, fighting in the hot sun. As Dad washed the blood off his hands and dug a hole, I slapped hard, my hand, hot and full of rage. Sometimes brothers fight. Section 3. As I looked out the dorm window, I couldn't help but notice the comical contrast of the vitality of summer and the emptiness of this place. The semester was horrible. Even cheating barely kept our marks up. Stress was high. What used to be encouragement turned cynical and overbearing. But I get it. We were both under stress to get out of here. I pulled my head out of the clouds and looked at the clock. Damn, 4:11. I was going to be late and still had to trek across the whole school. I'm so fucked. Today we review for our final exam, and the instructor practically tells us what's on the exam. I leaped up and shouted toward the bedrooms. Let's go, we're late. I vaulted over the many pizza boxes which grazed my knees. I pulled my number 11 pencil from the dark pile that consumed our kitchen table and shoveled it into my bag. It was my last one. Of course I could buy more, but I've used the same brand and color since I was a kid. Dad used to buy them for me. Sparky would chew the erasers. I felt my body jerk. I shouldn't be reminiscing on bullshit. I need to hurry up. I rushed outside without locking the door. He'll do it. We were speed walking through the narrow, dim halls, faces blurring as we sped past, eyes so dark and lifeless. This really is where the dull souls go to die. Buzzing so strong it forced its way into my throat. The metallic taste, thick blood. We passed section C. I looked at the clock. 4:22. Fuck. Why didn't you wake me up? His voice sounded like he just got out of bed. We kept rushing through the hallways. The halls are more narrow in this section. We were shoulder to shoulder. Less and less students passed until the halls were eerily empty. Complete silence except for the buzzing, but the building radiated. You could feel it. All the busy people, the failures, the hate and the drama, soaked into the walls. 5:11. Are we lost? My body flew back as he yanked my backpack. This is exactly why you don't rush ahead of me like this, he said, catching his breath. You're basically a lost puppy, like you know who. Heat radiated out of me, my hands burning hot, my face tingling and aching. I never meant to leave the door open. I was 11 years old. How would I know Sparky would run that quick? I closed my eyes and I could see the tail lights in Sparky's crushed skull. I'm so tired of this. Just follow me. Section 4, 4:44. How the fuck did it take us 30 minutes to get here? I stumbled into class knowing any minute missed could be lost GPA. The air was foul, not just the usual stuffy. Putrid, like there was rotting garbage somewhere the janitor missed. Our usual seat was open, but of course someone was sitting close. We quietly shuffled over. The smell of roses lifted me up. This trespasser was not an ordinary human. It was Maria. She must have snuck in late. My hands trembled. Isn't that the girl you like? He smiled like a kid in a candy shop. I nodded. You have to talk to her. Don't fuck it up like usual. I exhaled. I tell you what, if you talk to her, pizza is on me. What an asshole. We sat down. One seat between me and this goddess. My heart slowed. I'd never seen her this close. Her skin glowed in the light, her aura radiating. I looked for a moment too long, my eyes darting away. I'm not a fuck up. I'm not a fuck up. I'm not a fuck up. The words repeated in my head. I closed my eyes. I heard my brother's voice. The things I didn't do, things I didn't say, the mistakes. But this is my time to shine. I turned my head to Maria with a small forced smirk. Hi. It came out quiet, but it actually came out. I was doing it. Her head turned towards me. Hair flowed with a small, sweet breeze, caressing the air. Then the sky went dark. Her eyes, not blue but dark and empty. Her gaze shot away as soon as we made eye contact like a mouse fixated on cheese. I could barely see the instructor's face. The shadows clung to every wrinkle, exaggerating each one until he looked deformed. The back of everyone's head blended together. A single pelt of fur. The image disgusted me. But maybe that's what I look like too. That was pathetic. His big brown eyes grew dark. I knew you'd fuck up. You always do. He now had a sinister grin. You couldn't even save Sparky. I buried my head into my hands. You couldn't even talk to her. Ringing so loud, I was nauseous. My heart and hands on fire. Like how you couldn't look Dad in the eyes in his final days. You're a pussy. I dug my fingernails into the wood until they bled. The crack of a number 11 pencil made a few students jump. I stood, hands trembling, eyes now on me, the lights hot and bright, without thought, only purpose. I pulled out my Swiss Army knife, extended the knife attachment, held it to his throat, his lifeless eyes and stupid fucking grin. He knew I wouldn't do it. One swift motion. Silence. Finale. Update. A few hours later. I never knew him. I've seen him around. Something was off. I've seen him talking to himself, but I try not to judge. I arrived late for class that day. I wish I had just skipped. The way he looked at me with those sad blue eyes before he did it. Sometimes when someone's jugular gets cut, their blood keeps pumping until there is none left. I learned that in biology. It shot out like a fountain, covering the floor, the desks, the ceiling. But for me, it was a shower. I never knew blood was so warm and viscous. It rained out for at least 2 minutes. Hysteria. Good thing I wore red that day. The image will forever be burned in my brain. His lifeless, drenched body. The only thing not covered in blood. A broken number 11 pencil. I'll be switching schools.